Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Ferris, and I'm the Director of the Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy, as well as a professor in the School of Policy, Planning, and Development. We're thrilled that you're able to join us for this spring installment of our Distinguished Speaker Series. Today, we're going to really continue a conversation that was started last fall when Sally Osberg talked about social entrepreneurship and the work of the Skoll Foundation. Today, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship too, but not around the world, but here in our own backyard, in our own communities, our schools. You know, several years ago when we started this series, one of our early speakers was Vartan Gregorian. He was president of the Carnegie Corporation, and he talked about a nation at risk 30 years later. Well, today, some 8 years later, we're still talking about how to improve our schools and the education of our children. Today, we'll hear from Michelle Rhee, who, as Steve Goldsmith refers to her in his new book on the power of social innovation, refers to her as one of the great civic entrepreneurs, someone who is working to improve education of our children regardless of what it takes to get it done, regardless of what sector the change comes from. I know it'll be of keen interest to you since so many of you actually are working on this issue here in Southern California, whether you're on a board or a donor or a principal or a charter school starter. So we're really delighted that we're going to be able to sort of focus on this topic today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dean Jack Knott of the School of Policy, Planning, and Development. He holds the Irwin and Ione L. Piper Deanship and Professorship in the school. He's a leading scholar in the fields of political institutions and public policy, health policy, and public management, and occasionally he sort of dabbles in philanthropy and foundations, which we appreciate at the center. He has his PhD from Berkeley, a master's from Johns Hopkins, and a bachelor's degree from Calvin College, so he's well-traveled. We're indeed fortunate to have Jack leading the school, and Jack, give him a round of applause.
Well, thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Center's Board of Advisors in the school, I'm really pleased that you're able to join us for this year's 2010-2011 Distinguished Speaker Series. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of Jim Ferris for his leadership of the Center, as well as his strong leadership in the philanthropic community. He and his faculty colleagues conduct research and provide education that helps us better understand philanthropy as well as the nonprofit sector and their important role in society. So could we have a round of applause for Jim as well? And I'm really pleased to welcome our distinguished speaker this afternoon, Michelle Rhee, founder and CEO of StudentsFirst. Michelle, we are really delighted that you are here with us today to share your views and your experiences on philanthropy and school reform. I had the privilege of hearing you speak some years ago when you were superintendent of schools in Washington, D.C. Didn't know who you were, and we're in for a real treat. She got a standing ovation about halfway through, so she's a phenomenal speaker. The mission of the USC School of Policy, Planning, and Development is to prepare tomorrow's leaders and to produce knowledge that leads to innovative solutions to some of the most pressing issues facing society. And the school's ultimate goal is to improve the quality of life for people and their communities here and abroad. And the Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy plays an integral role in the school by contributing to the school's research, educational offerings, and outreach in philanthropy and nonprofit management. And I highlight in particular their contribution to a robust graduate certificate program that we now have in philanthropy and nonprofit management, as well as just newly formed undergraduate track at the undergraduate level in nonprofits and social innovation. The center is critical to our reputation and the attraction of students and our ability to provide these important educational programs at both the graduate and undergraduate level. Indeed, I think the center represents the best of what USC and our school are known for, and that's basically the combination of excellence and entrepreneurship. With an impressive crowd of over 200 leaders from philanthropy, the nonprofit sector, government, and business in attendance today, this event and its success would not have been possible without the work of our host committee. And I'm not going to read all their names. Their names are listed in your program, and I hope you take a chance to look and see who they are. But I would like to ask them to take a moment and stand so we can thank them for all their efforts in bringing this wonderful luncheon together for such an outstanding group of leaders. Please stand and give them a round of applause. Could you stand, please? I also want to acknowledge the members of the Center's Board of Advisors who are with us here today. The Board of Advisors provide Jim and myself with really wise counsel. They have had unwavering support, and they have contributed to making the accomplishments of the center possible. The members of the Board of Advisors, I'd really like you to stand as well so we can recognize your many contributions to the center. Would the members of the board please stand? Thank you very much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Wendy Wachtel, who will share a few words with you about the center. Wendy is the president of the Joseph Drown Foundation, which was formed in 1953, and whose goal is to assist individuals in becoming successful, self-sustaining, contributing citizens. The foundation is interested in funding programs that break down any barrier that prevents a person from continuing to grow, thrive, and learn. And Wendy has been with the Drown Foundation for over 20 years, which is hard to believe, but she's also widely regarded as a leader in Southern California's philanthropic community. And I'm personally grateful to Wendy for her leadership on the Center's Board of Counselors. She was one of the Center's founding members and founding member of the board, and she continues to be instrumental in guiding the Center as we go forward. So please join me in welcoming Center Board member, Trojan alum, and now proud Trojan parent, Wendy Wachtel.
I confess I forget all those Trojan relationships that I now have. Thank you very much, Jack, and good afternoon and welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. As you heard, I have been a part of the center since its founding, and I really take great pride in all the accomplishments of the center. The center's mission, for those of you who don't know, is really to provide research and analysis that will help philanthropists and foundations tackle the community's most pressing problems and have a greater impact in all that it is that we try to do. And in order to be effective, we as philanthropic leaders really need to have a much better understanding of one another and of our field. And I'm very proud that the center has done what it's done in its first decade to help meet our increasing needs for research and analysis in the field of philanthropy. The center has built a national reputation for timely and insightful analysis of giving, which has helped to make philanthropy more effective while also driving strategies for public problem solving and public policy. And it's studies like the analysis of the size and the scale and scope of Los Angeles foundations, or the research on foundation strategies for public policy engagement that have helped philanthropy to understand how we can best accomplish our own goals of really affecting true social change. The center is committed not only to doing all of this research but for disseminating that research. So if you go to the center's website, You'll find that all those reports, all of those papers, all of the past speakers, and all of the past forums are all there for all of you to see if you would like to. And as events like this show, what the center has really become quite remarkable at, almost from its inception, is that it has become Southern California's premier convener of individuals concerned about the impact of their giving. And we strive to bring together philanthropic-minded individuals into various settings to share those experiences, to learn from each other, and to inspire each other to greater heights. Today, as Jack mentioned, there are over 200 distinguished key leaders from across the sectors for this one-of-a-kind event. And the center is, and in that, the center is providing another really vital service to our philanthropic community. By promoting dialogue about philanthropy's role in public problem solving and helping to create these networks among those of us who are working in these communities, the center is helping all of us to think a little differently about how we might achieve those innovative solutions for those most critical needs. I would like to take just a minute to thank all of our supporters who make the important work of the center possible. And in your program, you will see all of the organizations listed that are our philanthropic partners. And they are really a truly special group. They realize that philanthropy, like any other field, benefits from careful study, discussion, and debate. And like me, they believe in the importance of building our field. So will all of our, I promise this is the last time I'll ask anybody to do this, but will all of our philanthropic partners stand up for just a moment and be recognized for your contributions to the center? Thank you to all of you. And the last couple of years have taught us many things. And I know for me, it's reinforced the ever-changing nature of philanthropy and the critical need for places like the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy. I encourage all of you to join this group of dedicated supporters so we can ensure that the center is able to provide us with the research and analysis that our field needs in order to tackle society's most pressing problems. So with that, we will allow you all to eat lunch. We will and spend some time talking to your neighbors at your table, and we will come back to you in a few minutes. Thank you. Yes. Yes, sir. Our fearless leader. Okay, I still have the microphone. No. I have the microphone, and I can make trouble. Thank you.
For those who haven't been to one of our speakers' events previously, I want to explain what the 3x5 white cards, index cards on your tables are for. While Michelle's talk today, if you have a question that pops into your mind, or maybe you came with a question, write it down. And we have two of our graduate students, Anne-Marie and Ashley, in the back of the room. Raise your hands. And they'll be sort of walking around the room and just sort of get their attention and hand it to them. And at the end of Michelle's remarks, Fred will be able to pose selective questions, representative questions to Michelle as time permits. Okay? Now it's my pleasure to introduce Fred Ali, who chairs the Center's Board of Advisors. And he will introduce today's speaker, Michelle Rhee. I suspect most of you, or many of you, know Fred, who is the president and CEO of the Weingart Foundation, one of the leading philanthropic organizations in the U.S., who has for the last 36 years worked to solve problems here in Southern California. Fred has over 35 years of varied experience in the nonprofit world, educational institutions, and government. His work across the sectors gives him a unique perspective, which helps set the chart and helps guide the center in its work. Fred is a trusted advisor, a colleague, and a good friend, and we're thrilled that he's not only leading the Weingart Foundation, but helping the center forge its new directions. So will you please join me in welcoming Fred Ali.
Well, good afternoon. And for the record, it's not my birthday. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our afternoon speaker, Michelle Rhee. But gosh, I mean, what a crowd! This is really fabulous. And you know, Michelle, as I told you earlier, no pressure, but I think that today's distinguished speakers event sold out faster than any prior event. So that's just wonderful. This room is, yeah. Now, you know, Michelle, no doubt that's a real tribute to your many accomplishments in the field of education and your courage and willingness to, as we used to say back in the day, your willingness to speak truth to power. And again, your so many accomplishments in this field. But I also think it's indicative of, you know, when I think of so many busy people in this room turning out today, that I think it's also very indicative of the concern that everyone in this room has about the state of our educational system. And clearly, as we continue to face an ongoing budget crisis in this state, the prospect of further reductions in education funding, I think, has us all concerned. And so what we're talking about today is really important, and I know something that's on the minds of a lot of people here. Michelle has worked for the past 18 years to give children the skills and knowledge they need to compete in a fast-changing world. She is currently the founder and CEO of StudentsFirst, which she formed in 2010 in response to an increasing demand for a better education system in America. Her goal, and it's a big goal, is to sign up 1 million members and raise $1 billion to support this bold initiative. StudentsFirst, as many of you might know, is a grassroots movement designed to defend the interests of children in public education as they pursue transformative reform so that America has the best educational system in the world. As Michelle so eloquently noted in Waiting for Superman, America needs a better system of public education that puts students' needs before those of special interests or wasteful bureaucracies. In 1997, Michelle founded the New Teacher Project to bring excellent teachers to classrooms across the country. Under her leadership, the project became a leading organization in understanding and developing innovative solutions to the challenges of new teacher hiring. As Chief Executive Officer and President, Michelle partnered with school districts, state education agencies, nonprofit organizations, and unions to transform the way schools and other organizations recruit, select, and train highly qualified teachers in difficult-to-staff schools. In June of 2007, then Mayor Adrian Fenty appointed Chancellor Rhee to lead the District of Columbia Public Schools, a district serving more than 47,000 students in 123 schools. And I think is now well known under Michelle's leadership, the worst performing school district in the country became the only major city school system to see double-digit growth in both their state reading and state math scores in 7th, 8th, and 10th grades over 3 years. Quite an accomplishment. Michelle has a bachelor's degree in government from Cornell University and a master's in public policy from the Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. So it's again my honor and my privilege to introduce Michelle. Michelle, again, thank you for making the trip and joining us today. And so please join me in welcoming Michelle Rhee.
Thank you. Thank you. So in case you can't see, I have my Dodgers pin on. In part because Steve said that if I wore it, that he would give me season tickets, and now that I'm not a public official anymore, I can take those. But more because after the few weeks that my fiance has had up in Sacramento, it's out of solidarity for being able to keep the team. So. I'm going to talk today a little bit about my experiences in Washington, D.C., but also about what I think we need to focus on as a nation if we're going to significantly improve the public education system in our country, because I do not think that there is a more important issue that we face as a nation. So as Fred was saying, in 2007, I was brought in as the city's first schools chancellor in D.C. And it was an incredibly interesting experience because it was at the time the lowest performing and largely considered the most dysfunctional school district in the country. And just to give you a sense of what that meant for our children every day, I'll share with you a few statistics. In 2007, if you were a ninth grader entering into high school in our system, the probability that you would graduate from college was about 9%. So only 9% of those kids could plan on graduating for college. We had an achievement gap between where our white kids were performing and where our black kids were performing of 70 percentage points. That's 70 percentage point gap. We, of all of the 8th graders in the city's schools, only 8% of them were on grade level in mathematics, which means that 92% of our young people did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. And probably the most disheartening data was about our little ones. And what that data showed was that our children were coming into the system relatively on par with children who looked like them from other urban jurisdictions. So not with their suburban counterparts, because they were far below those kids, but kids who looked like them in cities like Philadelphia or Detroit, Newark. The problem was that the longer they stayed in our system, the worse off they were. So by the time they got to the 3rd grade, they were far below their urban counterparts. And this was an interesting statistic, which was that by the time they reached the 4th grade, the poor black 4th graders in New York City were operating 2 full grade levels ahead of the poor black 4th graders in Washington, D.C. So for everyone who wanted to blame the low academic achievement levels of our children on poverty and on single-parent households and violence in the community and the lack of health care, et cetera, the last time I checked, the poverty in Harlem did not look all that different from the poverty in Southeast Washington, D.C., but the children in Harlem were 2 grade levels ahead of ours. So that's the situation that we faced, and I came in, was very excited about taking the job on, and I would go out often in my first year on the job and speak to large groups of people like this, and I would sort of try to give a really rousing speech about kind of my vision for public schools in the city. And it was interesting because almost always after those talks, someone would come up to me and say, we like you, Michelle. You're enthusiastic, and you're motivated, and you're articulate, but you are not going to be successful. And I'd always say, gee, thanks. Why do you think so? And they say, because schools are a reflection of the communities that they are in. And as long as we have the economic disparity in this country that we do, we're going to have the educational inequality, because you're going to have some neighborhoods where there are lots of resources and lots of engagement, and in those neighborhoods you're going to have great schools. And then you have other communities where there's poverty and a lack of resources, disengagement, et cetera. And in those places you're going to have not so good schools. That's the way democracy and capitalism work. Get used to it. And I never believed that that had to be the case, but I could never figure out a way to articulate why something else was possible. And it wasn't until about a year and a half into my tenure, I had the good fortune of meeting Warren Buffett. So first of all, never in my life, people, would I ever have thought that I'd have the chance to meet, the richest man in America. But there I was one night in Omaha, Nebraska, having a steak dinner with Warren. And in the midst of it, he looked at me and he said, Michelle, it is very easy to fix the problems in public education in America today. And I said, super, Mr. Buffett. Why don't you tell me what that is so I can run back to DC and implement it? And he said, well, all you have to do is make private schools illegal and assign every child to a public school by random lottery. So think about that for a minute. Because if we did that in Washington, D.C., which means that every ambassador's child, every CEO's child, every congressman's child, and the president's 2 children all got assigned to a random DC public school by lottery, which means that a huge percentage of them would be going to Anacostia for school every day. I guarantee you that you would never see a faster movement of resources from one side of the city to the other as you would in that circumstance. And I also guarantee you that very quickly we would have a system of excellent schools. So the question in my mind is not, is this possible to do? It is possible to do. The relevant question is, do we as the adults in the system have the wherewithal that it would take to make the incredibly difficult decisions necessary to make that a reality for every child? And the very quick answer to that question so far has been no, we have not been willing to do that. So I did not have the power to make private schools illegal, nor did I think that that was a good idea. But I thought, what? It is still, I believe in public education. I believe in the probability or the possibility of a school district to reform itself. And so I sort of set about trying to do this. And one of the first things that people came to tell me was, you have to figure out, Michelle, where all the money is going. Because we were spending almost more money per child than any other urban jurisdiction in the nation, and our results were at the absolute bottom. We were a proof point for why more money does not equal better results, right? And so I thought, well, that makes sense as a good place to start, so I sent my staff out to figure it out. And very early on, one of my staff members came to me and said, okay, I'm looking at the budgets and I'm looking at the big line items. He said, and I figured out that we spend $80 million a year transporting a few thousand special education kids on buses to their schools. And I kind of did the quick back of the envelope math, and I figured out that it was $18,000 per kid per year on busing. And so I thought to myself, first of all, for $18,000 a year, you could buy the kid a Saturn the first year and a driver for the Saturn every year after that. Right? So I said, look, this is great news. I don't know anything about running bus routes, but I know I can do it for cheaper than $18,000 a year, so I'm going to take all that money and put it in the classroom. And he said, no, actually, you can't do that, because the district had done such a poor job of transporting these kids in the past that now there was a court case, there was a consent decree, now there is a court-appointed special master. And he is allowed to spend as much money as he wants to transport the children, and all you can do is pay the bill. You have no ability to control costs whatsoever. And I said, okay, that is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. And he said, just wait till you hear my next one. So then he says, I'm trying to figure out, where are these children going? And he said, as it turns out, there are so many special education children who were not getting the services that they needed from the school district that they would routinely sue the school district, win in court, and what they won was the ability to go to a private school, and we had to pay the tuition. He said, but the crazy thing is that in most of these cases, it's actually not necessary to do. So he said, let me just give you an example. He said, I found one employee, just a mid-level employee in the district, and in 1 week she made 2 different mistakes. In one case, she did not fill out a form she was supposed to fill out, and in another case, she didn't have a meeting she was supposed to have. And in both these cases, because of those mistakes, we lost the case, and each of these children got sent to a facility that cost the district $227,000 in tuition per child a year. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to meet this lady, right? So my assistant calls her and says, ma'am, we need you to come to a meeting at the chancellor's office tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And she said, well, I'm gonna have to check with my supervisor on that. He said, ma'am, the chancellor is your supervisor. She's everyone's supervisor. And she's like, okay, well, fine, but I'm gonna bring my lawyer then. He said, bring whoever you gotta bring, just show up at 5 o'clock. So the next day, she comes to the meeting, I walk in, I said, so I understand you had a question about whether you should come. She said, no, I'm sorry about that. I was a little nervous, I didn't know what to do. And I said, okay, that's fine. So I said, I pulled out each of the case files, and I said, so here's the situation. You didn't fill out the form, you didn't have the meeting. With 2 mistakes, you cost this district nearly $500,000. Help me understand what's going on. And she said, well, what you need to understand, Chancellor Rhee, is that I am a very busy person. She said, I have a lot of kids in my caseload. I have a lot of things to do. Things are gonna fall through the cracks. That's just the way that it is. And I looked at her and I said, no, you need to understand that if you believe this job is too big for you, then you need to go find another job. I said, but if you're gonna take the paycheck home every other week, then you have to take personal responsibility for everything within your job purview. And not only that, for doing it extraordinarily well. She looked at me and she said, but that's not fair. And literally, this was the mentality and the experiences that I had with people going in and out of offices for my first few weeks on the job. So finally, at that point, I did what I think most CEOs in a turnaround situation would do. I started to fire people. That didn't go over so well. So, I did a couple of these firings, and then, into my office runs my then general counsel. And he says to me, Chancellor Rhee, you have got to stop firing people. And I said, why? I mean, if there are people who are not doing their jobs, then we need to move them out, and we need to bring in people who will do the jobs. And he said, welcome to the DC public schools, where we never fire anyone. And I said, you know what? I think you're exaggerating. I've talked to people in the city now. They've told me that there is actually a way to do this. I don't want to break any rules. Just tell me, what I need to do to follow all the protocols and procedures. He said, well, there are only 2 ways that you can fire a teacher in the DC public schools. I said, okay, give me the first way. He said, the person has to have done something egregious. And I said, well, that's perfect, because everybody that I'm talking about is egregiously incompetent. And he said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Egregious only means one of 2 things. Either you have to have hit a kid, and we have to have a videotape to show it, because 5 teachers and the principal witnessing it is not enough. Or you have to have stolen money from the district, and essentially we have to have the bank receipt to show it. Short of that, nothing counts as egregious. I said, okay, that's not good news. What's the second way that this can happen? And he said, well, you have to show a recurring pattern of incompetence. I said, well, these people did not magically become incompetent the moment that I walked in the door. Surely we ought to be able to show a pattern. He said, well, that's what you would think. But what you don't know is that for the last 10 years in the central office, no one has received a performance evaluation. And in order to meet the legal letter of the law of showing a repeating pattern, you have to have the documentation. And because we've never did a performance evaluation for anyone, we don't have the documentation, so you can't fire anybody that way either. And I said, okay, that is really not good news. I said, so tell me, what are we supposed to do with these people if we find that they're not doing the jobs that they should be doing? And he said, well, you can do what we normally do. We send them down to the schools. And I said, are you kidding me? I'm trying to get these people away from children, not put them closer to them. So I decided, you know what? My best move right now is to send these people home for a little while. Because think about the woman I pay $40,000 a year. She comes into work for a week, makes 2 mistakes that cost me $500,000. My best cost-cutting mechanism is to let her stay home for a little while. And then I went to the mayor, and I said to him, sir, You brought me in to do a very difficult job, but the difficult job becomes the nearly impossible job if I can't bring in a team of people that I feel like are accountable to the outcomes that we want. And he said to me, you know what, Michelle, if we don't like the rules of the game, then we should change the rules. So we introduced legislation to the city council that allowed us to turn all central office employees into at-will employees, right? It was firestorm #1 in the city. People went nuts. In fact, probably the most interesting day on my job over the 3 years that I was there was the day of the city council hearing about this legislation. It was 14 hours long. And throughout the whole day, people were parading in and out, Michelle Rhee is a, dictator, she's terrible, she wants to fire people without due process, and, what about development of people, all this sort of stuff. And it was fascinating because for 14 hours, there was little to no talk of children, of schools, or of student achievement, right? And I kept thinking to myself, due process, the children have no due process, right? If you were a kid in our system who did not get the education that you deserved that given year, there was no appeals board that you could go to, right? Please refund my parents' taxpayer dollars because I did not learn what I was supposed to this year. No, we would just pass you on to the next grade without the skills and knowledge that you needed, and everybody got to keep their jobs and keep their contracts and go along their merry way. And at one point in this whole thing, somebody said to me, don't you believe, Chancellor Rhee, that a teacher, for example, who is not effective could become more effective through professional development if you would just give that person a chance? And I said, perhaps, but let us not let children languish in their care in the meantime. I said, because I can tell you, I sent my 2 daughters to the DC public schools, and I can tell you that if I showed up for school on day 1 and my daughter's principal said, welcome to 1st grade, here's Olivia's teacher, guess what? She's not so good. But we are going to take this year to professionally develop her and see if she can improve her practice. Olivia and her 23 classmates may not learn how to read this year, but we think that's the right thing to do for this adult. I would never accept that for my child. Nobody in this room would ever accept that for your children. But we have scores of children throughout this nation who don't have the adult advocates in their lives, who know how to navigate their way through the system and get out of this person's classroom and into that person's classroom. So we literally have children languishing. And it is extraordinarily difficult to rationalize this kind of a system when we know that if, in particular for poor and minority children, if they have 3 highly effective teachers in a row versus 3 ineffective teachers in a row, it can literally change their life trajectory. The probability that they will graduate from high school, go on to college, et cetera, goes up hugely if they have those 3 highly effective teachers in a row. If you have 4 highly effective teachers in a row, it can close the achievement gap that exists between poor and minority kids and rich suburban kids. I mean, so this is what we're talking about. This is what's at stake, right? So say, for example, I said to Olivia, honey, you are going to have to suck it up this year because we're going to, move forward and let this person, see if this person can become better, right? What if Olivia and her classmates the following year were unlucky enough to have another ineffective teacher? Are we willing to sacrifice 2/3 of a kid's chance in life so that we could professionally develop 2 adults? So those are the questions that we have to ask ourselves. So that was the system that I took over, kind of the mentality and the culture that existed. And I want to just take a few moments to talk about some of the things that I've both learned and that I think we really need to tackle as a nation if we're going to change the circumstance. So the first is we have gone soft in this country. We have completely lost our competitive spirit. We spend so much time trying to make children feel good about themselves that we don't spend the time actually building the skills in them so that they are good at something instead of just feeling good, right? So I see this with my own 2 kids. I have 2 daughters, 12 and 9, and they play soccer. They suck at soccer. They take after their mother instead of their stepfather to be, and so they can't play the sport. But you would never guess that, because if you went into their rooms right now, you would see trophies and medals and ribbons. You would think that I am raising the next Mia Hamm, right? And I'm looking at this, so I try to tell my girls all the time, you are not so good at soccer. If you want to become good, if you want to be great, you actually have to spend 90 minutes a day kicking the ball against the wall or into the net and that sort of thing. That's how you become great at something. Right now, you're not so good. But it's very hard for them to square the medals with what I'm saying about, mediocrity. And so it was interesting because yesterday I was meeting with an 83-year-old, very well-known philanthropist in the country, and he said, I won't swear, so he said, what the heck is going on in America? He's like, last summer, I went to my great-grandson's summer camp awards ceremony. He said, and the thing was 3 hours long because every kid he's like, and by the end, they were giving awards out like, this next award is for the best 10-year-old, blue-eyed, blonde-haired boy who's wearing red shorts, and his name is Bobby today. Woohoo! Right? And so he was telling me this story, and it is interesting because my family is from South Korea. And South Korea, if you look at the international comparisons academically, are at the top of the list everywhere. I actually spent a year in South Korea when I was in the 4th grade, and what was most shocking to me was the fact that you went in, and this starts in kindergarten, there were 40 kids in the class, and we were all ranked 1 through 40, right? So if you were number 17, your parents were saying, by next semester, you better be number 13. If you were 2 or 3, you're angling for, even number 1 is not feeling good about himself because he's looking behind going, oh crap, who's coming up behind me, right? So they're not all worried about Singapore. There's an inborn part of the culture that is about sort of a constant striving to become better. And I think we had that in this country, but we're going to have to regain it somehow. Because right now we have a culture where we are raising a generation of children, and we've sort of taught them to celebrate mediocrity. And I will tell you this about children, they rise to the expectations we set for them. And so if the expectations are really low, they'll meet those. So competition, that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to talk about is parents. So it's interesting because as I travel around the country and I'm talking to people about education, almost always after I'm done talking, the first question that I get asked is, well, what about the parents, right? And there's this sort of narrative going on that basically says, if only the poor and minority kids would have better parents, then they'd do better academically, right? And so, what about the environmental factors that impact kids and this sort of thing? So I want to kind of hit this on the head, but let me first say this, that I believe that parental involvement is incredibly important. The research is clear on this, that if you have higher levels of parental involvement, the kids do better academically, you have a thriving school, all of that. So we should do everything that we can to try to spark more parental involvement and get more people into the schools. There is no doubt about that, okay? But on the other hand, if you look over the last 6 months in this country, we've had 3 very, very interesting, very high-profile parent cases. So the first was in Waiting for Superman, right? One of the reasons why I love Waiting for Superman is because it violates the expectations that people have of poor inner-city parents, that they don't care, that they're not engaged. These parents in the movie would do anything to get their children into a good school, and they knew when their kid was not getting a good education, right? So that's the first group. The second group is actually a group of parents here in this area, the group of parents in Compton, California, whose children were attending one of the bottom 5% of schools in the state, and they utilized the new law, the parent trigger, right, where more than 50% of them signed this petition, which forced the restructuring of the school. And then the last was this mother in Akron who falsified her residency documents so that her kids could go to a school that she felt was safer and where they would get a good education. So let's look at what happened to each of those groups of parents. In the first group, these parents, despite being willing to make all those sacrifices, were told, I'm sorry, there is no room for your child at this school, this high-performing school. You're just going to have to attend a neighborhood school. The second group of parents here in Compton were harassed. They were threatened with deportation. I mean, it was unbelievable what the status quo did to these folks to try to get them to rescind their signatures off of this petition. And the last lady, we throw her in jail. So I don't think we're sending the message to American parents that we want you involved in the public education system. I actually think that we're sending a very, very different message. I can't tell you how many cities I go to where mothers come up to me and say, yeah, I want to get involved, but there's a rule in our school that you're not allowed to come into the classroom between the... It's crazy what's going on, and I think that we are not creating the environment in our public schools right now where parents, are welcomed into the schools. But I do also acknowledge the fact that there are some parents who are not engaged, and that does make it extraordinarily hard for our young people every day. So let me be clear. A lot of kids who come to school, particularly in inner city districts throughout the country, face enormous challenges. Nobody fed them breakfast the morning of, nobody helped them do their homework the night before. I mean, these are very, very significant challenges that cannot be ignored because they make a difference in the readiness of those kids to learn every day. But, let's tell a quick story. So I have a friend who lives in DC, and he's an educator, and most of his family is from North Carolina. So he gets this call from his relatives all saying, oh my gosh, your grandniece, she's run into some trouble. The school is calling all the time. We don't know what to do. Can you call down because you're a teacher? You just find out what's going on. So my friend calls down to the school and says, can I speak to somebody who can tell me what's happening with my grandniece? And they said, oh yeah, she was causing problems in the school. And so we said that she is not allowed to come back to school until her mother comes up with her. And my friend said, trust me, you do not want my niece to come to the school. He said, she's a little nuts. She's probably going to start a fight. You may have to call the cops. You don't want her in the school. He said, but are you going to abdicate your responsibility for educating my grandniece because of her mother's actions? He said, because if that is the case, then you might as well tell this 9-year-old to drop out of school now, because her mother is never going to do the right thing. And that is where I think we are right now, is that for those kids who we know are in incredibly unfortunate situations, are we willing to subjugate those children to a lower quality education and lower expectations over something that they have absolutely no control over, which is who their parents are and what their parents decide to do or not do? I think personally that that's holding kids hostage in a way that is very, very un-American and unsustainable. So that's that. My last piece, and I think this is incredibly important, is that education has become incredibly politicized. It is all about the politics and very, very little about the children. Now, people throw the kids around a lot when it's helpful, right? Well, look what the kids deserve, but it really all does come down to the politics. And I think my message here is that you have to be willing to sort of step outside of the political field, and we have to reorient ourselves towards a different dynamic if we're going to truly transform education. So let me give you the example of why. I'm a Democrat. Lifelong, card-carrying Democrat, always have been my whole life. And when I came into DC, I was faced with this unusual situation because in DC there was a traditional public school district, there was a very, very strong and vibrant charter sector, and then there was a voucher program where poor kids could get vouchers to attend private schools. So I came in and very quickly sort of got caught up in this, well, what do you think about the voucher program? Do you support the voucher? Because it was up for reauthorization. And my instinct was, no, as a Democrat, I've never been for vouchers. I think that you should, invest the money in the system that you need to fix, et cetera. But I said, you know what, before I make any kind of grand proclamations, I need to talk to people and sort of figure out how the system works. So it was interesting because I met parent after parent after parent in the city who had done everything the right way, what we would want them to do. So first they would research their neighborhood school, and they'd figure out, okay, only 10% of the kids at this school are on grade level. My kid has a 90% chance of failure. I am not sending them to this school. They would then take the next best step, which was they would apply through the out-of-boundary lottery process, because we had about a dozen schools on the other side of town that were very, very high performing. So they said, let me see if I can get my kid into that school. But the number of spots was very little, the number of kids on the list very large, so inevitably they would not get in. And then these parents would come to me and say, now what do I do? And I thought, okay, I cannot look this mother in the eye. I mean, who am I to deny her a $7,500 voucher, which, by the way, was $1,500 less than what we were spending per child, so that her child potentially go to a Catholic school and get a great education? I was not willing to say to that mother, you know what, just take one for the team, right? And give me 5 years to fix the system. Stick with me while I do this, right? Because if I didn't have a place at a school that I would send my own 2 children to, then I cannot ask another mother to make that sacrifice of her children, right? So I was trying to make this argument the other day to a friend of mine, and she didn't buy it even after all of that. And I said, okay, did you see Waiting for Superman? She said, yes. I said, little Bianca, right, who wasn't allowed to go to her kindergarten graduation because her mother was behind on the tuition payment. And she said, oh, God, that was heartbreaking. I wanted to rip out my checkbook and write the check myself. I said, right, honey, that would be a voucher, just a different kind. So we have to get out of this political ideology about this is a Republican agenda or a Democratic agenda, and just focus on policies and the impact that they have on individual children and families. If we can do that, I actually think that we can move a far distance in this whole field. Part of the reason why I started Students First, my new organization, is particularly to combat this problem that we face. Because I think that over the last 3 decades in our country, the education agenda has been driven by special interest groups, right? You have textbook manufacturers, you have teachers unions, you have testing companies, you have all these people out there all exerting their influence. And the problem is that there is no national organized interest group with the same heft as the union, for example, who's advocating on behalf of children. So if you have, one of the reasons why the union is so effective is because they have millions of dollars and millions of people. And they use those dollars and those people to get the politicians that they want elected, the laws that they want passed, and the laws that they don't want blocked, right? So if we're going to change this dynamic, then we also have to have a national organization with millions of dollars and millions of people who are advocating on behalf of kids. See, we can't begrudge the unions what they're doing right now. People always say to me, how can we get the unions to become pro-reform and think about kids first? And I always say, that's not the purpose of the teachers union. The purpose of the teachers union is to protect the rights and pay and privileges of their members. And they're doing a really, really good job of that right now, right? I said, the best indication of this is Al Shanker, who was the AFT president years and years ago, once said, when school children start paying union dues, I will start looking out for the interests of school children. That was, to me, the most honest statement that somebody could make. That's not my job. My job is over here. I got it. But the question is, how are we then, instead of leaving this room and thinking, oh gosh, this is nuts, what are we going to do? Or, oh yeah, Michelle, good job. Let me go back to my work now. We have to figure out how we are going to come together as a nation, because everything that is happening right now, I think people know that it's a problem. People don't know what to do about it. And that's where we have to come together. Because I believe that public education is supposed to be the great equalizer in our country. It's supposed to be the thing that ensures that it doesn't matter if you're black or white, rich or poor. We have a public school system so that every child can have an equal shot in life, right? If you work hard, you do the right thing, you can live the American dream. That is not the reality for most of the children in inner city America today. The reality for them is if you live in Watts at Compton versus if you live in Beverly Hills, you get two wildly different educational experiences. To me, that's the biggest social injustice imaginable, because it essentially means that we are still, in this day and age, allowing the color of a child's skin and the zip code that they live in to dictate their educational attainment levels and therefore their life chances and their life outcomes. To me, it's the most un-American thing imaginable. And if we want to do something to live up to our promise, to ensure that this truly is the land of opportunity and freedom and the home of the brave, then we owe something to our kids to say, regardless of your circumstance, where you live and who your parents are, if you work hard and do the right thing, you can succeed in life. The only way that we're going to do that, though, is if you get involved. I travel around the country now, and it was interesting because I was in one state, and the state legislator who I was trying to get to vote on one of our bills said to me, you know what, Michelle, I'm with you. I get it. He said, let me just tell you, my challenge, though, is that when I go home to my home district, I guarantee you that the teachers union people are going to be picking out in front of my office and hooping and hollering about how much they don't like this. And that's really hard because those people are my constituents. I said, right, Senator. This is the thing that you have to consider, though. Your job is to look out for the interests of all of your constituents. And if you are simply turning to where the voices are loudest, then you will necessarily be turning your back to the children in your district because they can't contribute to your campaign, they can't vote, they can't send out a robocall or any of those things. They are the silent victims of this insane system. And unless you and other people like you understand that your obligation is to speak up for those people, those constituents, then this game is never going to change. And that's not just for elected officials. For decades in this country now, we have run the education system based on insane rules like last in, first out, right? Last teacher hired must be the first teacher fired, regardless of performance. And in fact, here in California, you are one of only 14 states in the nation where that is embodied in the state law. The state law says you must conduct layoffs in that manner. We know that this is not good for kids. This has been going on for decades. And part of the reason why it has been able to go on for decades is because all of those decisions and laws get made behind closed doors. You all, as normal citizens, you don't know. You're not involved in it. You have to hold your elected officials accountable for the decisions and the policies that they're making. Right now, people across the country, when I talk to them, say, oh gosh, California, you can't do any work in California. Those people are not, California and New York, there's no hope in those places. And I actually don't agree with that. We have more members of Students First in California than any other state across the country. More than 40,000 people have signed up to be part of Students First. The unfortunate thing is in other states, we can give our members something to do. Okay, this bill is pending, email your legislators, et cetera. In California, there's nothing even moving to mobilize the people around. And these legislators, I'm telling you, year in and year out, decade in and decade out, have been allowed to operate in this manner with zero accountability. We did a poll that said 75% of Californians believe that last in, first out policies are wrong and should be changed. But there's nothing happening with your elected officials to make that a reality. You have to bring these things together. You have to get mobilized. You have to get active. It is the only way, in my mind, that we are going to change the public education system in California and in America today, is if everyday citizens like you stand up and mobilize around a movement. Thank you.
So that was great. Thanks, Michelle. We have time for some questions, and while Michelle was talking, some people handed us some index cards. So I'm gonna get started with the first question. And Michelle, as you know, there's a lot of people here in this audience that represent philanthropy, and I know you have integrated philanthropy into your work in the public school system. So the question is, do you have any recommendations for philanthropy and things that we should be doing and maybe things that we should not be doing?
So I think this is a very interesting question because for the last 20, 25 years in this country, the rhetoric or sort of what you commonly heard was, if we only knew what worked in education, then we could take it to scale. That's the biggest lie of public policy today. We actually know what works. We just don't want to do it because it's really hard, right? If you look at schools in this state, like the KIPP schools and the Aspire schools, they are doing absolutely unbelievable things. And they'll be very honest with you that it's not easy work, it's hard work, but what they do is very clear, right? So that's, I think, one of the things that we have to get over is like, yes, we needed the proof points. Now we have the proof points, there's just no desire to actually take those to scale. And I would say this, that as philanthropists, one of the things that you want to do is figure out how you can use your dollars not just for direct programming, but as leverage. So I think that it can happen in two ways. When I was in DC, we raised a lot of external money for our teachers union contract because the city didn't have any money to put towards raises. And I knew I wanted lots of big changes, so I raised this external money from important, national foundations like Broad and Walton, et cetera. And I said to the union, look, we have no money in the city coffers, but I have this money over here. Now, this money is only available if we sign a contract that has no tenure, no seniority, and no lockstep pay. So for 2 years, they tried to convince me, like, okay, we'll take half of that money for half of the concessions. And I said, no. This is an all or nothing deal. These people want to see a revolutionary, groundbreaking contract, but they're not going to settle for half the stuff. And what it did was it created a dynamic where they were essentially walking away from millions of dollars on the table so that they could hold on to their age-old practices. It wasn't flying in the public discourse, and it definitely was not making sense to their rank-and-file members. So for 3 years, I tried to negotiate this contract. It was very, very ugly. And it was interesting because the union the whole time kept saying, well, we're not going to get the members. They're never going to go for this, all this sort of stuff. When they finally allowed it to go to a vote, the union members passed it 80% to 20%. So the vast majority of teachers had absolutely no problem with higher levels of accountability, et cetera, because we created a system where if you are a highly effective teacher teaching in a high-need school and in a high-need subject area, you got paid twice as much money as you were in the old system. So that kind of leverage, I think, is incredibly important. The second thing is thinking about policy. So I know a lot of you are supporters of charter schools. I'm a big advocate of effective charter schools. But what I see a lot of funders doing is, oh my gosh, this charter school is so great. They're middle school, they want to grow to a high school, which we do. We got to build them a building and all this sort of stuff. There's a screwed up dynamic here because you can either, raise the money to build a $10 million facility, or you could put the $10 million into advocating for different laws at the state level. Right? So the most progressive charter facility laws, like the ones that we had in DC, said charter schools have first right of refusal over any unused government building. So you actually had to ask the charters first. Right now, what school districts are doing is they are locking the charters out of use of their facilities because they don't want the competition. Right? So all of this stuff, these policies, these laws are set up for a very specific reason. I'm telling you, $10 million in a campaign to change the law overall would go a tremendous distance, and then you would be solving the problem for all charter schools, not just the one that you're sitting on the board of. And so I think that you've got to think about scale in that kind of way as well.
So Michelle, I'm going to paraphrase a couple questions I have here. People are wondering, in the face of sort of continued reductions in school funding in California, and the prospect of more to come, is reform really viable here in California?
So I absolutely think that it is viable, but only if we tackle this problem in the right way. I think that what is happening right now in this state, and you're not alone, there are other states like this, is that the legislators are saying, I'm sorry, we can't do anything with school reform because we just have to solve the budget problem. The budget problems are so massive that we can't even deal with policy right now. I think that is a huge mistake. If you look at the data, it is very clear that over the last 3 decades, the amount of money that we spend per child for public education in this country has more than doubled. This is controlling for inflation, has more than doubled. But the results have stayed the same at best, and in many cases has gotten worse. So this is a very hard argument for anyone to make that we should be putting more money into a broken system. So what I think we've got to be pushing in states like California is, let's not just try to figure out the tax extensions and all that sort of thing. Those things have to be tied to reform. Because for those of you who are business leaders out here, you know, if you have a line of business within your company that is a loser in terms of not producing the product or the quality, or it's losing money, your answer is never, let's throw a lot more money into that line of business, because we're just gonna hope and pray that it turns around. No, you have to fundamentally reshape what is going on there, because if you don't reshape it and you continue to put the dollars in, it's not gonna make any difference. And then we're creating a harder and harder case to make in the longer term. So in my mind, this is an opportunity to actually use the fact that, you know, we need public sentiment around the budget, but tie that to the reforms. And I think that opportunity, you know, you wouldn't have it potentially otherwise in flush economic times. In flush economic times, you can't be talking about seniority last in, first out policies, because it's not a front burner issue. Nobody cares about it. It's not going to affect you tomorrow. This is about to affect this state tomorrow. And so now is the time to deal with this, when you can say to parents across the state, that kid, that teacher that your kid had that you loved is about to get fired, not because, you know, they're not great, but because they happen to be the last person hired by the district. So if we can connect this to people in a way that makes sense, I think this is actually an opportunity, not necessarily a disaster.
So Michelle, maybe one final question, and again, a number of you asked this in different ways. So given your experience in Washington, now looking back, are there things you might do differently?
Well, I made a lot of mistakes, so I'm far from perfect. I think that sort of policy-wise, we were pushing all of the right things. I think that our biggest challenge, our biggest shortfall, if I could sort of sum all those things into one thing, was we didn't do a great job of communicating. So I sort of, you know, assumed that we were all on the same page. I assumed that if I put my head down and kind of worked hard and produced these outsized results, that people would want those results to continue. And I could not have been more wrong on that. I mean, people cared about the process by which we got there. So it didn't matter as much that we went from, you know, being last in the country on the NAEP examination to leading the nation in gains in reading and math, 4th and 8th grade. It mattered that people were sort of saying, well, why is this happening? And probably the biggest light bulb that went off in my head, and this was after it was too late because it was after my boss lost his reelection bid, but I saw this polling data. And it was fascinating because the pollsters asked people who lived in the poorest parts of the city, what did you think about the public school system before Adrian Fenty took over? And the vast majority of them said it was awful. And then they said, what do you think about the school system now? And record numbers of them said that they had more confidence in the school system now, that it was heading in the right direction, et cetera. And then they asked the question, and this was the kicker for me, is like, do you think that the actions that were taken by the Chancellor and Fenty, you know, closing schools, firing teachers, were necessary to get those results? People said no. So it was, you know, I'm doing all this stuff because I think everybody knows, but this was a shortcoming on my side, right? I was not connecting the dots for people to be able to say, I'm not firing people because I'm a mean person and I get some. No, it's because the quality of teacher in the classroom every day has a direct correlation to the quality of education that your kids are getting. And so because we hadn't connected the dots, they saw this stuff that was going on that was very controversial and tumultuous, and they weren't connecting it also with the sense of confidence that they, because they could see that the schools were getting better. And so that was probably one of our biggest deficiencies. We had a lot of them, but probably that was one of the biggest ones.
So, Michelle, again, on behalf of the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy, I want to thank you very, very much for being here. And one of my big takeaways today is I'm going to go home and have a different talk with my granddaughter about her soccer performance. I'm a little concerned about that, but I want to just say thank you to all of you for taking time to be here today. And it was a great presentation. We all learned a lot. So good afternoon.